Good morning, welcome to Moonshadow Orchard. We are a pistachio farm. Pistachios are harvested in September, and we are hosts with the Worldwide Organization for Organic Farmers, and I'm trying to show our volunteers how you pick pistachios, how you process them, and that it is not a terribly complicated process that everyone should be able to enjoy. I also would like to encourage people who have land to grow some nut trees. It's a very easy thing to do, and it certainly provides you food for yourself and lots of critters for a long time. Pistachio trees are noted for being able to survive over 100 years. So long after I'm gone, I'm hoping this orchard is still here. 15 years ago, my two sons and I put in this orchard, and this is one of our original trees. Off this tree, we should get about 6 to 8 5-gallon buckets of pistachios to process each year. So these are now mature nuts. When you take them off the husk, you will see that it is yellow right where you pick them off the stem. That is the easiest way of knowing they are ripe. These are not particularly red. Some of them are more red, but the way to really tell is if it easily comes off and it's yellow where the stem meets. So from this little clump of nuts, I wanted to show you this is how you tell they're ripe, when they have yellow where the stem has come off, and then it just peels right out. Whoops. So then you can throw away the stem. So some of them are already, we call these premium nuts, that are already open. Some of them, as they dry out, they will develop cracks, but we have ways that we can crack the nuts. And so the whole idea is to be able to take the fresh nuts, pick them, and within a 1-day period get them so that all of the stem and all of the exterior green is off, so that you just have nuts that you can then dry. So see, this one is green. So when you pull that, it's telling me that's not ripe, but in all likelihood, it's also a blank. So I can't even get this to zip off. And I can tell that if I were to clean this whole thing off, that nut, there's no nut in there. It's a lighter color, so I know that's blank. So it's just as well that it stays stuck on the stem, because that makes it easier for me to process all the ripe nuts, and I would just consider this nut a discard. On a clump of 20 nuts, you're going to have 5 or 6 that were just blanks and did not get pollinated. Pistachios are a very ancient kind of tree. They have a male tree and a female tree. And so our orchard has just over 100 trees, and about 90 of them are females. So pistachios take about 7 to 9 steps. First of all, we pick all of these, and then the important thing is to figure out how to get the nuts off of the stem. The reason we try to do that right away is because the stem and the outer husk on these nuts will stain the nuts. So the traditional white nut that you see in the stores is from nuts that have not had a lot of staining on them. And about half of them will already be opened and ready to go, and the rest will still need to have some extra work done in order to get the delicious nut out. So over the last 10 years, when my husband Mike and I have been processing most of these, we have tried many different ways to get all of the nuts off of the stems. I know people who actually just do it by hand. That's their preferred method, and that's what they use. Typically we have a tarp that's laying down when we put the nuts on. You can always roll the tarp over and step on those, and that will be a good way to crunch down the nuts and the stems come off easily. Our preferred method is that a few years ago we purchased a cement mixer just for processing pistachios, and so we throw a couple buckets of pistachios in, turn it on for 10 minutes. That turning action is enough to agitate and take most of the nuts off those stems. The ones that remain on the stems you will find typically are blanks and they're unripe nuts, and so they are fine to discard. It's important for pistachios to be able to dry down quickly after they are harvested. It's hot here in Arizona and they're moist, and so if you were to pick them and not get the outer husk off and get them drying quickly, you would run into problems with the moisture and potentially molding. So what you do is for the first 3 days you dry them as quickly as possible, and then that nut is shelf stable for months and months. So 10 years ago when we first started processing, I had looked up videos on how you do this, and I found there really wasn't much, which is part of why we're trying to show just the normal process of how we are processing. And this is actually our 3rd week of processing, so we started in the very beginning of September. So when I first explored it on the internet, they suggested that for home use of pistachios you could take old jeans and cut the legs off and make it so that you had a drawstring on both ends, fill it with pistachios, and then you could step on those so that it basically crushed the nuts and then just left the ones that were the unripe ones. So that seemed like a good idea, and I spent a day doing all of that, and I can tell you after the first day of doing that I woke up in the middle of the night with leg cramps that were just enough to drive you to your knees. And so I decided that's not the method I want for taking the nuts off of the clump. So we have just experimented, and so that's why we'll show you that when you actually just put it on fabric, and you can step on it if you want to try it that way a little bit, but that's why we go and use our cement mixer for that, because it just makes it so that we don't have that kind of issue. But you see, on any clump you'll get a whole bunch of nice nuts off of it. Some of them already are opening up even before you do anything. So here we have a beautiful pistachio that's already opened. For those of you who've never had raw pistachios, they're delicious. They go well on salads. When you first pull the shell off, there's a little membrane on it that a lot of times is kind of reddish, and people don't recognize that. When you've bought pistachios that have already been roasted, there's a little outer area, but it has already turned brown because of the roasting process. But these are delicious. We hope you enjoy our video, and hope that it encourages you to know that you don't have to be a big producer of pistachios and own a $1 million piece of equipment in order to do this. We have done this, and we probably have spent a couple hundred for a cement mixer, a few hundred for a nut cracker, and the rest is you buy food grade 5-gallon buckets, and you just transfer the nuts around, and so you can do it without a huge investment of finances. I was just going to give you some basic information about pistachios. We don't have any natural pests that get into the pistachios. We're always careful that at the end of harvest we clean up any debris so we don't attract any kind of bugs that might eventually get into the pistachios. But we've been raising these for 15 years and we don't have pests. So The other things we do, we're an organic orchard, and so we gather our neighbors' horse manure twice a year, and we work in about a 15-gallon container, like a 15-gallon tree container of manure on each of the trees, and rototill it in around the edge of the tree well, so that provides not only making the soil richer for later, but it provides the nutrients they need, and it's just slowly released during rains and when they're irrigated. We have them on irrigation, and pistachios have a dormant period after harvest. So starting next month, we will actually just shut the water off to them, and we won't put it back on until probably the end of February. If we don't get any rain, maybe once or twice we'll turn it on for a half an hour so that the trees get a little water, but they don't really need that. They're quite water intensive in August and September as the nuts are ripening and filling out. That helps to make the nut burst from the shell, and so we water half an hour a day twice a week in August and September. Other than that, we typically, see, when they get lots of nice water, they have burst open like that, and which is ideally what we want. And so probably starting the first part, like in March, when they're starting to get ready to leaf out and we're getting ready to prune, we turn on the sprinklers, we walk all the lines and make sure that they're all coming out in an even flow, and we probably only have the trees on twice a week, starting in June, and we start that at 15 minutes, and then when it's closer to the harvest time, we do that 30 minutes at a time, twice a week. That really takes care of the irrigation for them. We also, because we're in Arizona, we're looking for monsoon rains to supplement that. So we had 1 inch of rain in July, we had 2 inches of rain in August, and we had 2.5 inches of rain so far in September. And so that has provided a great abundance for our trees. Pruning wise, I went online and downloaded a video on pruning pistachio trees that the University of California had made up. And so the California Agriculture Association has that. Basically what they were suggesting is that, just like in this tree, you start with like 3 branches, and you can see that there's a lot of weight these branches hold, so it's important in the beginning that you make branches that are heavy and sturdy. So you want them to go for about 2 feet and then branch, and then you let that branch, and then you have a nice sturdy base so that it supports these nuts. Because each tree will give you a couple 100 pounds of nuts, and so obviously that weight becomes an issue. After we pick the nuts, we remove the stems and then use a paddle in a food grade bucket to remove the husks. After we remove the husks, we then take the nuts to the washing table. So we are now processing the nuts that have had the stems taken off and that outer coat. So we've built these processing tables from metal grates so that all of the debris will go through. It's really important, if you want the pistachios to be the typical light color, that you get all of the stems and all of the outer husk off, because it kind of stains it a purplish color. So we just vigorously move the nuts around so that much of it gets off, and then we'll spray them all down, and then we'll sort them. See, and then you can see most of that just falls through. So when I'm sorting, what I'm looking for is to eliminate all the stuff that is not going to be good. So you can tell by the color after you've done this a while. It may not be obvious to you right now, but I can guarantee you after you've done this a couple days, you will see some of these light colored ones and you will know that they have no nuts inside them. So I'm getting ready to pull all this back to clean it a second time, but you can easily see this is one of the blanks. This is one that the outer husk is still on, so that's garbage. This is one that dried on the tree. And so this is one that's brown and just doesn't look appetizing. So we throw all of those out. So we're looking for the big beautiful nuts here that are beige colored, that are already all clean and nice, and this kind we throw away. And so I'll eventually have about, from this table, I'll have about 4 colanders, 3 to 4 colanders filled with beautiful nuts, and about 1 colander filled with the refuge part that we don't use. So we built these tables when we first started processing, and it has been a good thing. I like the one that sits down. My husband likes the one that stands up. The one that stands up, it's nice because if you have extra people over processing, 2 or more people can easily process. The reality is I'm typically the one processing, so by the time I've done this for about 3 hours, I'm happy to have a table that I just lean on and lean over. Okay. So this is our drying rack. When you have pistachios at a homestead, you find that all sorts of critters, birds, chipmunks, squirrels, love the nuts. And so part of doing pistachios is they are a moist nut and they need to dry for 3 days so that the moisture content is reduced enough so that they can be put in 5-gallon food grade buckets and stored. And so we put them in here to keep them protected, and then each day we bring in new containers of nuts. So this would have been 4 5-gallon buckets filled with nuts that were pulled off the tree, and then the outer husk was, and this is what you get from those 4 5-gallon buckets of nuts. You'll see some of them are beautifully open and some of them are closed. That's based on the maturity of your trees. Our trees now give us well over 50% already opened, but then we still want to process the closed ones because that's a valuable food resource as well. So they just sit in here and dry. We have 4 shelves, so what we do is when you put the nuts in, they're still wet from being processed. So we know that these have already been here 3 days. So tomorrow we will take all of these out and we will put them through the sorting process, and then we will move each group up, and the brand new ones that are wet will go on the bottom so that they don't drip on the dry nuts, they just drip on the ground. In the Arizona sun, typically 3 days is all you need. This has been an unusual year, and we've had rain in September, which we don't typically have, and so we have a fan going that helps move the air to give it a better chance of drying thoroughly. So 4 days ago, these pistachios were on the tree. After we have done the initial steps to get the outer husk off, we have dried them for 3 days. You do that so that the moisture content is reduced, and then you can make these shelf stable and you can store them in 5-gallon buckets. So right now all of these have dried for 3 days, and we are dividing them between the nuts that are naturally open and the ones that are not. So the ones that are naturally open, they're going to go in a food grade bucket and they will be stored and we can use them later. There's another process for all of the nuts that didn't naturally open, and we have a machine that we then crack them open so they can dry another day, and then that's how we get the shelled pistachios. And also it breaks some of them, and so that's also then how you get the pistachio pieces for baking. And so there is a $500 machine that we had purchased a few years ago, and its sole job is to break nuts out of their shells. And pistachio shells are really hard, so if you try to just get a hand cracker, you will get very sore. So if you have buckets and buckets of nuts from a few trees, it's well worth it to invest in a nut cracker, because you will then have a lot more edible produce. So we have the nuts that we sorted, and this is a bucket full of the nuts that did not naturally open. And so we have this handy little machine that I got off the internet. It cracks nuts of all sizes. It's already been adjusted for the size of pistachios, and we adjust it so that it just cracks them open but doesn't crush them, because we would like to get some whole nuts out of those. So you adjust the size from moving this one way or the other. So we process walnuts and open it fully, and then when we process almonds, it's about halfway shut down, and then we shut it down more for pistachios. So take a measuring cup. This is about 2 cups. You can fill it about 2 or 3 times. And this is the hopper that you put the nuts in, and then they come out of this little chute. And they have crushed the nuts so that the shells are open. We want the shells open because I then need to dry these nuts, because even though they've been in the drying rack for 3 days, the shell was not cracked, so it prevented them from drying out. And so then these will be shelf stable in another day's worth of drying, and then I can use those for baking and also for making any of the recipes that called for the shelled pistachios. And shelled pistachios sell for about double what the premiums that have the open shell, so it's really about the same amount, and so it's worth harvesting your nuts that way, because you just make more profit for the trees that you've grown. So you use your own drill, and then you just put it on a 5-gallon bucket. It's made to fit that way, and so it is a very simple way to home process. I don't remember the name of this. We just got it off the internet under nut processors. So once I turn on the drill, I have a drill that allows me to set the automatic speed, and we'll go from there. Thanks for watching. I hope this shows you that pistachio orchards are viable things that you can harvest with just a few pieces of basic equipment that you can have around the homestead. It supplies you hundreds of pounds of nuts and good eating for the winter. If you have any questions, you can contact us at moonshadoworchard.com. Thanks.